In this video, we were going to talk about David Enoch and his chapter entitled Why I Am an Objectivist and Why You Are Too. Enoch is a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he is an eminent defender of moral realism. You can read his books and other work on this topic. So he's going to argue that we all intuitively believe in objective morality. And I'll say more about intuition later, but let me remind you of his definition of what we mean by objectivity. He says a subject matter is objective if the truths or facts in it exist independently of what we think or feel about them. They are objective, that is, if they are response independent. They are independent of our response to them. Now, Enoch's strategy is to try to convince us that we already believe that moral facts are objective. And he runs three different tests. And he says, if you test yourself, you're going to find that the way that you respond to moral claims is the way you respond to other objective claims. The first test is called the spinach test. And he recounts a funny thing that a little kid said. The little kid says, I'm glad that I don't like spinach because if I liked it, I would have eaten it. And spinach is yucky. In other words, the kid is glad that he didn't have bad taste and didn't get tricked into eating yucky stuff. Now, we tend to think of that joke as funny because we think, well, taste is subjective. If you had liked the spinach, then it wouldn't have been yucky. So it's impossible for you to like something that's yucky. By definition, if you like it, it's not yucky because taste is not objective. And that's why the joke is funny. Now, try running the joke with another domain, the moral domain, and see if the joke ends up funny or not. If it doesn't end up funny, it's because you probably don't think that morality is actually subjective like taste is. So think of it this way. I'm glad I wasn't born in the antebellum South because if I had been, I probably would have thought that slavery is morally permissible, and slavery is not morally permissible. Now, is that funny? Well, no, it seems like it makes perfectly good sense because you could have been actually objectively wrong about the moral status of slavery. Now, if you really thought that slavery is permissible if you liked it and if you believed in it, well, then it would be the same as the spinach joke and it would be funny. But if you're like Enoch predicts, then you don't think it's funny. Next, the Phenomenology of Disagreement and Deliberation test. Phenomenology is just a fancy philosophical term for how something feels, like what the experience of something feels like. So think about what it feels like to disagree with someone over an issue like global warming, which we typically take to be an objective matter. Either global warming is happening or it's not, regardless of what we think about it. Now, when you disagree with someone about it, there's, you can imagine how that disagreement goes. Or maybe you're unsure of it in yourself and you're trying to think about, well, is it happening or is it not? You're considering the evidence. Okay, so think about what that feels like. Now think about when you and a friend disagree over what the most delicious kind of chocolate is like. Is it dark chocolate? Is it milk chocolate? Is it white chocolate? Or think about when you yourself are trying to figure out, man, what is the best kind of chocolate, most delicious kind? Those two things, Enoch thinks, feel very different because the first case is you're trying to figure out an objective fact. You don't want to get it wrong. It feels like the stakes are kind of high. The second one is pretty, a disagreement with a friend about which kind of chocolate tastes the best is very lighthearted and almost comical because there is no objective answer about which kind of chocolate is most delicious. It's to each his own. There's no arguing about taste. Now, ask yourself, when you and your friend disagree about something, an important moral issue, for example, is abortion right or wrong? Or if you don't really care that much about that, something else, I don't know. Whatever issue you think is really important. Was the Holocaust a bad thing? What does that feel like? Does it feel more like you're disagreeing about global warming, or that you're having a disagreement about the best kind of chocolate? Enoch thinks if you're like him, you think that the moral cases feel a lot more like a disagreement about global warming, precisely because you think that morality is actually an objective matter. You don't want yourself or anyone else to get it wrong. Third test, the counterfactual test. If our fashion practices had been different, it would not have been true that top hats are out of fashion, for example. So let's say that, all the cool kids at school are wearing top hats, and the Instagram influencers are wearing top hats, and the newspaper is running articles about the best kinds of top hats, and so forth and so on. In that case, top hats would be in fashion. Now, so we take it that fashion is a subjective domain. That is, whether or not a top hat is in fashion or not does depend on our responses, on our attitudes, on our beliefs and practices surrounding top hats. It does depend on us. It's not objective. But let's say that our moral beliefs had been different and our moral practices, right? Let's say all the cool kids were really into racial discrimination, and all the Instagram influencers were really promoting that, and everybody on TV was really supporting racial discrimination and things like that. Now, and maybe our whole culture was basically really into it. Would that make racial discrimination morally permissible? Well, if it's like the top hats, then the answer is yes. But if you think that, well, no matter what my culture is doing, that would still be wrong, then you must think, says Enoch, that morality is objective. Because that only makes sense if morality is objective. Now, what's the point of all of Enoch's tests here? The point is to try to convince you that even if you think you're a relativist or an anti-realist or a subjectivist, some kind of anti-realist, even if you think that about yourself, actually, in your heart of hearts, intuitively, you really think that moral claims are objective. Okay, let's be clear, though, about what he has and hasn't tried to prove. Right now, he's just tried to convince you that he knows you better than you know yourself, and that, in fact, you really think that morality is objective. But that's different than trying to prove that morality actually is objective. Even if the tests that he gave accomplish all that he intended, all he's proven is that we all actually think that they're objective moral facts. That doesn't prove that there actually are objective moral facts. So why should we think that there really are objective moral facts? In other words, why make this leap from what we all actually, as it turns out, intuitively believe to the claim that, hey, we're actually right about that. There really are objective moral facts. We'll talk about that in the next video about Enoch.